Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Tommaso Luzzati, and you can see there's Nives, Della Valle, and also Tiziano. So, welcome to this webinar, and which is on this special issue we launched some times ago, behavioral ecological economics, and then we need to, we have some slides as well. So, Nives, could you launch the slides? Okay, good. So, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, and so here you can see the team of the editors. Nives uh, was, was the boss. She coordinated us, and you can see on that the team was made by Anne-Kathrin Blankenberg from Berlin, Tiziano, and, uh, and Leonardo Boccinelli from Florence, and myself from the University of Pisa. And, and so we decided that to launch this special issue. And next. And so the outline of this conversation is why this special issue. Then we would like to focus uh, on how we managed with the special issue and what happened during the special issue. And then in the end, we will talk about some preliminary thoughts, because actually some papers are still on their way. They are still being processed, and the review process, as many of you knows, is very long, and it's sometimes difficult to find reviewers, and sometimes reviewers accept, but then they don't deliver the reviews and so on. So there are many papers on their way, and so we were hoping to have very clear ideas by today, but we don't have a clear outcome, although we have some very important preliminary thoughts. Next one, please. And so the general aim of the special issue was how to enhance understanding on how individual behavior and collective actions can foster an ecological transition. So this was the general aim, and in particular, I wanted to promote research on drivers and barriers to pro-social and pro-environmental behaviors. And at the same time, the role of those behaviors in shaping collective ecological action and enhances justice. And so we invited contribution, as you could see on the call, on experimental, theoretical, and empirical paper with the purpose of integrating behavioral economics into ecological economics. And so our starting point was a sentence by Stefan Drews, that is a growing amount of behavioral research in the Journal of Ecological Economics is being published. But sometimes it is not very clear the difference and with other fields, and in particular from behavioral environmental economics. And so, of course, we have so we had in mind to try to ask peers and colleagues to help, in a sense, to help developing uh, um, uh, and ideas of what behavioral ecological economics could be, and to what extent can it be different from environmental behavioral economics. And so, of course, we have at the individual level one important idea and difference, which is not often emphasized, is the endogeneity of preferences, would mainstream economists say. And it is important to know what is the human agency, which is uh, at the basis of ecological economics. And usually, in mainstream economics, you have given ends and means, and so we try to find the best means to get some goals. While it is very important to remind the emphasis that Carl Wilhelm Kapp put, still remaining within rational choice theory. Kapp took his idea from Mies and Veblen, that is, individuals are not automata, like in mainstream economics, but they are active, they learn, and they are social beings. And those you can see the words that Kapp has used in 1975 in a beautiful paper published on Kiklus. In those years, Kapp published a lot on this journal, and with his specifically human intelligence. Man is capable of using reason and science for the explorations of goals and as a basis for judgments as to the kind of and direction of action to be followed. So, in our opinion, it is important to have in mind that human beings are not automata, and preferences are not given. And then again, if we move to the social level, we need to, how do we aggregate preferences? And of course, if you assume that preferences are given, then we can somehow aggregate, maybe in the welfare, social in the welfare social function, uh, or we can use monetary evaluation methods with all problems of commensurability. Uh, um, at the other hand, if we start from a better idea of human agency, then as ecological economists, we prefer democratic participatory process and non-compensatory multi-criteria methods. And finally, moving forward, now we have in ecological economics a very important systemic level. And so we have the systemic approach, and so we need systems-oriented solutions, analysis and solutions. And for instance, what emerged also from several papers is that we also focus very much on collective action. So, and how behavioral aspects and social influences or social psychology can shape the collective action. Uh, and so, next one, yeah, and so, in a sense, the behavioral ecological economics emerged from integrating the inside of this field. Now, how cognitive biases and emotional factors affect environmental decision making, how affect their economic behavior, and how societal norms and social contexts shape both environmental attitudes and actions, including the collective actions. No? Okay, so I think I will stop here if I'm not wrong. No, then Vives, if you put the next one, the next slide. Okay, so it is the turn of Tiziano.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tommaso, for this first part in the introduction. Yeah, I will briefly summarize the main steps and the process that through the elaboration, definition, and the launch of our special issue in Behavioral Ecological Economics that has been published in the Economics Journal. Please next, Nives. Yeah, I mean, just to also tell to the audience how this process is also a human process. It required time, and it was also an opportunity to meet new people. For instance, I didn't knew Anne before this special issue. While we were already in contact with Tommaso and Nives and Leonardo, so it was also a way to create networks and to start new collaborations and elaborating new ideas as Tommaso sketched out. No? So mostly we realized that these topics, so the idea of combining behavioral and experimental economics with ecological economics was not explored in the literature, or very few. And so we met at the end of the 2022 with first talks and meetings, and then we decided to create a workshop in Florence, also thanks to the funds that our department every year destinate to this purpose. And the workshop went quite well, so we decided to write a proposal to be sent to the Ecological Economics Journal that was accepted, and then we are almost completing all the process of review and eventual acceptance of the paper, as Nives will show us. Please, next. Yeah, so the workshop was made in July 2023, so more than 1 year ago, in the University of Florence, with a strong collaboration of the University of Pisa, thanks to Tommaso, that also elaborated this new website on ecological economics in Tuscany. That is, I think, a good platform to collect the main activities in Tuscany, in which a lot of ecological economics are trained, fortunately. And the workshop focused mostly on the applications of behavioral and experimental economics to ecological economics, and also try to define what could be the difference between two growing fields, the behavior and experimental economics on the one hand, and ecological economics to the other. And we discovered that possibility to make some bridges were possible. And also we received, if I'm not wrong, around 40 submissions with more or less 25 presentations. Next, please. Yeah, and the structure of the workshop was composed by two keynote speakers, as was already mentioned, Stephen Drews and Jensi Moll, and four main topics were addressed. So 4 presentations were discussing the environmental preferences, while other 7 discussed the difference and the possible contributions of nudging and boosting. Briefly, nudging is mostly related to the definition and creation of some incentives that should lead and guide the individual behavior, sometimes through monetary incentives, other times through different framings, for instance, while boosting should be more related to the issue of education, so to the promotion of an active role of individuals also in both in the behavioral and systemic change. And then some presentations regarding the experimental economics, and others they try to link more than one scale, so not only the individual level but also the local systems like the communities or the green policies. Overall, we host almost we host around 20 presentations, and half of that were made by young scholars. So meaning that it was a good signal for us, because it means that also the new researchers are interested in these topics, and indeed they almost 50% were PhD students, or they got the PhD from less than 2 years from from the presentation. And also the participation was rather broad, although it was the first edition of this kind of workshop, and indeed they came from 11 countries and 3 different continents. Please, next. Yeah, and I show you just a couple of highlights of related to the special issue from the keynote speakers. The first one is this, let's say, topology of alternative definitions of Homo made by Stefan Drews, who was also responsible for one of the first definitions of behavioral ecological economics. And as Tommaso said, one of the idea of neoclassical economics is that humans are like kind of machines that maximize a specific function already determined, and so they try to manage the scarce resources to attain specific objectives. However, Stefan depicted more heterogeneous and detailed the possible definitions of Homo. So could be Homo reciprocans that underline mostly the altruism and the relations between human with respect rather than the focus on egoistic objectives. Psychologicus, so related to the different the so-called cognitive biases. Homo politicus, already embedded in a specific institutional context, and many others, for instance, Homo ecologicus, Homo faber, efficiency, sustenance, and of course we can imagine many others. But the idea is that we should, through this special issue, we try to convey more than one kind of Homo, and try to see if how the researchers had, what kind of Homo the researchers had in mind. And the next one, please. Yeah, and while the main contribution by Genzi was the application, the explanation, the application of virtual reality to make experiments, let's say. That is a rather new field that seemed to be a good bridge between the ecological economics and behavioral experimental, because through these devices, the experimenters were able also to test alternative, let's say, realities or alternative contexts, not necessarily linked to hypothetical conditions in which they are asked, for instance, to their willingness to pay, or in which the incentives were strictly linked to monetary judgments. Next. Yeah, so these are some of the main points that we highlighted during the call, although of course the content has been slightly modified, and new content emerged from the submissions, as Nives will show us. So the call, the starting point highlights the importance of the integration between these two fields, mostly because it seemed to us that they were growing and well studied, but not very linked. So from our perspective, a better linkage between behavioral experimental economics and ecological economics could have provided us with a better understanding of socioeconomic also transformation and possible fine-tuned policies. And again, next one, please. Yeah, and so the main, if we want to summarize some of the key keywords that we highlight during the call, by one hand, the special issue promotes the investigation of the main drivers or the main obstacles to the adoption of pro-social and pro-environmental behaviors, not only, as we said, from an individual and isolated perspective, let's say, but also by including the definition of citizenship, and so the idea that humans are actually a part of a community, whatever they are, and so they are part of also social processes. And also we address the role of these behaviors in, also in defining not only different habits or different consumption, for instance, habits, but also the definition of new collective ecological actions and to promote justice as the normative part is one of the core in ecological economics. So the idea is to also to have something that was, in a sense, ethically oriented. And as I said, yeah, the inclusion of alternative methodologies rather than the methodological individualism that is usually characterized the neoclassical economics, but also to include other kind of methods and other definitions of rationality, for instance, ecological rationality or system thinking or many others. And one other important aspect that was relevant to us is to underline the role played by non-monetary motivations. And so also on, as Tommaso said, the definition of possibly endogenous preferences or behaviors that could be defined by the context or by the relation and the connection with among the people. Please, next. Yeah, so the call was rather open, so we accepted different kind of methodologies and approaches, so both experimental or empirical papers or even theoretical one, that promoted and that contribute to the definition of the bridge between behavioral and experimental economics and ecological economics. And as I said, the main points were related to the possibility to identify the main drivers of behavioral change that could be included in policy instruments, but also the possibility to promote also bottom-up initiatives in which peoples were asked to concretely define the objective and the way to social ecological transition, whatever it means. The content should be, in theory, defined by the people as well, and the considerations of multiple dimensions, so not only the economic and the monetary one, but also other dimensions like the social, the cultural, and ethical values. The next, please. Yeah, and yeah, is just an example of how we, maybe it's not clear the image because it's a bit little, but the idea is that as proposed in the literature, most of the neoclassical economics and also the policies, because there is a linkage between the methodology that is applied, so individual methodology and the kind of policies that are proposed, mostly nudging, are in the context of what is called in the literature the I frame, so the individual frame, in which the complexity is rather low and more or less the human control could be higher because targeted to individual actions. But if we go more ahead in complexity and human control and knowledge, in the literature we found other kind of definitions. So the S frame, so the system frame, the N frame that could be the natural frame, and also the C frame that is the collective one. So the idea was also to promote a better understanding of how these levels are interacted, and so how different actions could be taken at different levels. So it's not to neglect the importance and the relevance of behavioral and experimental economics that is focused on I-frame, but also to recognize that we have problems that are at different scales and so needs different kind of interventions. And I leave the floor to Nives.
Thanks a lot, Tiziano and Tommaso, for this nice overview. So now we go to what happened after the call. So as I mentioned also by Tommaso, what we will say today is only some preliminary, it's a preliminary overview as we are still reviewing some manuscripts, and so we have also to digest all the inputs from all these manuscripts, and when the editorial will be ready, of course, also the definition of behavioral ecological economics will be perhaps much clearer, but it's nice to share with you today some of these preliminary insights. And so what we can share for sure is starting with some numbers. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we received really many manuscripts. So this was very nice to see such a positive response from researchers. And in fact, we received about 150 submissions. And we have to say that in these submissions, we didn't consider the submissions from the co-editors, such as Tiziano and Tommaso, because we didn't handle, of course, our manuscripts. These were handled directly by the editor-in-chief. But in any case, the number was very high. And as you can see, about half of them were desk rejected. And this amount, this percentage is actually very in line with the percentage of the desk rejection of the general issue, so the Journal of Ecological Economics, meaning that we really went through all the manuscripts, and in fact, we had to be strict on our criteria for selection. And of course, we follow different criteria. First of all, the methodological consistency, as mentioned also by Tiziano. We were open to many methodologies, but we try to really check for methodological rigor, such as for the experimental economic methodology. We try to see whether the sample was sufficient, whether the experimental design was sound, or even we looked at the research questions, whether they were too much vague, or whether, for instance, the theoretical framework of reference was clear, and also whether for non-empirical papers critiques were a bit based on judgment rather than existing concepts or frameworks, and of course, one important criteria was the attempt of the authors to integrate either behavioral economics with ecological economics, or ecological economics with behavioral economics, because of course papers could be more grounded in one or of the two fields, but of course the idea of the special issue was to integrate both fields. So this was a critical criteria for rejection. And some, of course, after the review, many were rejected, and so far we have almost reached the final stage where the papers are getting all reviewed. As you can see, 13 are still under review, but most of them are reaching maybe the final stage of the revision. And so we need to be patient, because of course this is also a collective effort, not only of the editors, but above all of the reviewers, and so we that might take some time, but hopefully by the half of next year we will be able to finalize everything. In terms of other numbers that we would like to share with you, it's also the team composition. And of course, this is only a hint that we can get from the affiliation of the authors, but we thought it would be nice to share this, as if we want really to create a field that is based on the integration of two fields, perhaps a good proxy for that is also the affiliation, or let's say the affiliation of the authors, so the departments in which they are, because this might actually signal a potential interdisciplinary collaboration. Of course, this is a proxy, but it's to start having an idea, and less than half of the manuscript was written by authors from the same department, and so perhaps this doesn't hint for an interdisciplinary collaboration, but more than half was actually the case. So it was a team that might be considered interdisciplinary. In fact, we see collaboration between economists, engineers, or economists and historians, and so this might actually suggest us that this integration of two fields that are already interdisciplinary can continue on this line of interdisciplinary work. And coming to the next slide, that was already suggested by Tiziano, that we were very open to all methodologies, including non-empirical papers. In fact, we did have some non-empirical papers that were perhaps based on simple perspectives, or they were conceptual, they were developing conceptual frameworks, or they were a collection of reviews or systematic surveys. But let's say that the majority was empirical. And as you can see, the methodology that was, let's say, the most frequent was the experimental one with 66%. And perhaps this hints on the presence of the behavioral part, as it heavily relies on the experimental economic method. But already in the experiments, we have a lot of heterogeneity, because we didn't have only laboratory or online experiments, but also in that we have abstract or contextualized experiments, or we did have also some natural field natural experiments, or some randomized control trials. So we really had a variety of experimental approaches. And regarding the others, we had only a few papers that adopted the agent-based model or other simulation models, but still it's something, because we really hope to get also some of other methodological approaches. We had also some game theoretical approaches and other types of models, and we had a few other methods, such as the augmented reality approach that was also presented in the workshop, in the keynote speech, as Tiziano mentioned before, and the Q method. So we had a bit of different methods. And coming to the topics, this is, as I said, very preliminary, because we are still in the process of assessing everything. But just to give you an overview, if we want to start clustering the manuscripts that have been already accepted, we can see that there is not a clear topic that emerges in terms of majority. We have different topics that can be clustered, for instance, in the behavioral interventions, climate policy, values and perception studies, information provision and avoidance, ecological restoration, and systemic change. So when, for instance, we look at behavioral interventions, we had many studies that looked at the role of not only nudges, but also boosts at promoting pro-environmental behaviors. And so we have, let's see, a majority of studies that looked at this also policy-oriented dimension, because behavioral interventions is part of this larger policy toolbox that is not only made of traditional economic interventions, but tries really to take the individuals on board in a more human and realistic approach. When we talk about climate policy, we have papers that look at climate policy acceptance. So papers that look, for instance, at how different framings might make different climate policy more acceptable by individuals. But we also have some papers that are still within the climate policy domain, but that might hint into the systemic change. So for instance, how behavioral dimensions might make climate agreements more compliable, for instance. Then looking always at the individual level, we have some papers that look at the role of how providing information might make individuals more or less prone to engage in certain environmental behaviors, but also the role of information avoidance. For instance, the role of willful ignorance when individuals try to avoid certain information, not to engage in certain pro-environmental behaviors. And then going into the more systemic level, we have also papers that look at the underlying mechanisms of ecological restorations. So what actually drives individuals to engage in ecological actions. And then we have papers that are conceptual but also empirical that try to really embed the system into the individual dimension. So for instance, how behavioral interventions that are usually individual can actually inform more systemic interventions, and how also justice dimensions can be embedded in this discourse. This is an overview, and this is going into more in depth into some papers that again try to go in depth into these initial clusters preliminary that we identified. And looking at the behavioral interventions, we mentioned nudges, but we also mentioned boosts, and we also found many papers that looked at the role of social norm nudges. And of course, what we found in here is that, of course, the nudging approach is still prominent and might actually still fall in the so-called behavioral environmental domain, because of what we try to do with the nudging approach is to exploit the cognitive deficiencies of individuals. And so we consider individuals as something to be often fixed. And so it's something that we consider to be more in the behavioral environmental domain. But still these papers, while considering the nudging approach, were going into the ecological dimension by considering, for instance, the role of the practice that those interventions were aimed to were actually targeting. For instance, renovation decisions were framed in that study as a practice that can reduce energy consumption and can fit into the sufficiency discourse that are prominent in the ecological economic discourse, so the consumption within planetary boundaries. So these kind of papers, while starting from a behavioral environmental approach, they were going in this sense towards the ecological economic thinking. The boosting approach tries, as already suggested by Tiziano, to empower citizens, so to see them as active actors that can contribute to collective challenges, not as individuals that are deficient and need to be fixed, but actually need to be empowered to be part of a collective challenge. And we saw papers that look at the role of this boosting approach and that were targeting different pro-environmental behaviors. Looking at climate policy, as mentioned before, we saw papers that were looking at how, for instance, different framings and different mechanisms could make certain climate policies, such as the carbon pricing, more acceptable by individuals. And with this, we are still a bit within the behavioral environmental domain, as we consider individuals as passive receivers of intervention decided from the top. But still, those papers were kind of linking the aim of the study in a more broader perspective, in the sense that we're considering the ethical dimension as well of these policies. And when going to the values and perceptions, it was nice to see papers that were explicitly studying, for instance, values for care, for instance, others and nature, because it's something that we consider also crucial to link the individual and the systemic levels. And we got papers that were discussing explicitly to conceptual frameworks the role of values for cares in this sense, and as well as the role of ethical information that can influence individual behavior. And then again, here we mentioned the information provision and avoidance. This might still lying a bit within the behavioral environmental domain, as for instance, we saw papers that were looking at the effects of ethical certification such as fair trade on individual consumer choice, but we think that these types of investigation is crucial also for this field of behavioral ecological economics, as we need to consider also what individuals think when and how they behave when they need somehow to act and to contribute to the collective challenges and to reduce, for instance, the willful ignorance or self-serving beliefs that somehow slow down this process of participation. And then the two last categories are aligned with this integration between behavioral and ecological economics, as for instance, there were studies that were simulating to common poor resources game and public good games, the underlying mechanisms of participating in ecological restoration activities. And of course, this is a prominent example of ecological action from the individual to the collective, let's say, and then systemic change. So we have a paper from Stefan Rius that draws from the keynote speech that also he gave at the workshop, that tries to lay down the basics for this process of creating this new field of behavioral ecological economics, pointing out the need to really integrate the I frame with the S frame. And we also have papers that look, for instance, at the integration of the justice dimension in also behavioral interventions, such as behavioral interventions that target the most affluent. And in this case, we are here integrating the redistributive justice dimension that is needed in order to make ecological transition happen. So I won't spend time here, as I might repeat myself here, but what we can say is that, of course, two main difference between behavioral economics and ecological economics, the starting point at least are this I frame and the S frame. And so we really need to find a way to make these two frames talk to each other. Perhaps what we have started looking, deriving from the manuscripts so far, is that a good integration might happen when individuals are considered beyond their passive role, their mere role of passive consumers, but as active citizens who can have a voice and can participate as perhaps homo politicus, as it was shown before in a slide. Also, if we want to promote some actions, perhaps we can promote action beyond technology adoption, but perhaps practices that might involve consumption within the planetary boundaries, so sufficiency, for instance. And what is also very key is the introduction of values that really connect nature, others, and communities, and in turn institutions, and the equity and justice dimension explicitly, because yes, ecological economics, as Tiziano mentioned, has also this normative dimension, and it has to be explicitly mentioned if we want to develop this field. And we saw that some papers are already doing that, not only for the distributive justice point of view, but also the intergenerational point of view. And so I leave you with this, but it's of course just a tentative concluding slide, hoping that there are maybe some questions that we will be happy to answer. And I stop here.
Okay. So there are 15 minutes left for questions or comments, curiosity. I don't see any comments in the chat.
I received a question on a willful ignorance. So this happened when we might have some information that can actually inform better our decisions, usually as consumers, because we have the assumption that information might lead always to, or more often to, optimal decisions. But what happens is that some information might have also some moral implications, in the sense that if there is a decision that has some costs, not only economic costs, but also moral costs for us. And given that as individuals, we care about our self-image, so we want to look at ourselves as a good people that contribute to the public good. Usually, it's like that. We don't want to think about ourselves as bad people. So we try to avoid the information that might actually make us more prone to engage in that behavior. So for instance, if I know that there is an ethical information that might make me more prone to choose that product that is more ethical but perhaps more costly, I will try to avoid that information, because then I might engage in this cognitive dissonance with myself, and it's bad. So that's I hope it's more clear.
Okay, there is another question from the past society present by Roldan, who I also would like to thank for this invitation. His question is, what would be the main implication of the insights you have gained in behavioral ecological economics for climate policy? So, Nives or Tiziano, can you
Maybe
say?
just a quick comment. I think that as also Nives underlined, one of the two main implications probably are from one hand the methodological one, that is also strictly linked to the political one, and so the idea that actually people are not simply consumers but citizens, and I mean they have roles in several domains. So from the climate policy, I think that maybe with part of the submissions we received, and maybe also with the contents that we try to convey, we may define better policies, not only bottom up, just public policies by the government, but multi-level, let's say, interventions. So the idea is to understand that different problems have different scales, and so we should integrate these scales also in order to face climate issues that have different impacts, not only at geographical level but also at temporal level. So maybe individuals are, as we know also from the literature, are myopic, so they usually focus on short-term objectives, while, for instance, other bigger institutions or communities could focus mostly on middle or long-term objectives. So the idea is try to make everyone to have a voice, an active voice, and also to set up the proper agent, let's say, for depending on the kind of problem. So individuals could be the proper target for some issues, but for others we should we should look at the communities or other higher level institutions. So this is maybe my comment, personal comment. This is not just the, I don't know if Nives has another one, but
No, I totally echo your words. Maybe also to give another framework of reference that is informed, of course, by other fields, but it's richer because in the end, for complex problems, we need a diversity of perspectives, and perhaps behavioral ecological economics can help bridge some of these perspectives and also to target the different layers, as Tiziano was mentioning, and targeting the different let's say leverage the different drivers that belong to the different layers at the same time. So for policymakers, we need to give a framework that can not only make them be more able to understand the problem and the levers, but also to understand which types of interventions at which stage, at which layer. So this is perhaps more a hope than, but it's an ongoing process. And of course, it's not that with this special issue, everything will end. So
Yeah, and if I can add something, is just we have basically to address the issue of cognitive dissonance and the resistance to change, which is so widespread now in our society. So this is it is true for climate change, but it is true for all the environmental issues in general. And so there is a question by Tina Lisa. She asked what are the next steps and plans, and then also if we will have a second session after we reviewed all the papers. And I guess, yes, with the next steps is to draw the outcome, yeah, the outcome in the editorial. So at that time, we will have a clearer picture and more complete. I mean, it is still clear as you have perceived, but we are a bit cautious. And so, but then Tina is answering, yes, she would like to hear about the AR methods used and the findings there. So she would like to have another webinar. But I think that also Tiziano has something to say about the webinars?
yeah, yeah, thanks, Tommaso. Yeah, if there are no other comments or questions, just I mean, by as part of the board of the IZE, we are promoting and launching this webinar, this series of webinars are related to the special issue. So this was also the first one, so it was an experiment as well, and we hope that we fulfill with the initial expectations. So just trying to convey the main messages and also to explain a bit how the process of special issue is made up. And in the next month, I mean next year, we will host other webinars targeted to specific to the special issues already published in the Journal of Ecological Economics, and we try to keep this updated, also linked. And I recall you that the next year in July there will be also the conference on the IZE in Norway, so everyone is welcome to send the abstract, and also we hope to promote other special issues linked to the special sessions that will be accepted and discussed during the conference and also later. So I mean, everyone is welcome and to contribute to these or other fields, or to create other fields as well. So it's a good opportunity to meet and join and try to define new boundaries, new of the knowledge. And yeah, from my side is fine. I mean, we have a few minutes left. I don't know if there are any
again, there is a question, an anonymous question from the from the past president Roldan, who does, yeah, it's about the climate denialism, no, that we have in the US, and he asked whether it is connected to cognitive dissonance. Yeah, in my opinion, yes, it is connected very much, but of course, it's only my opinion. It is connected to the resistance to change, and then no, also we have a lot of resistance to wind power, a lot of community, local community fighting against wind power, and so on. I mean, my personal opinion is that we are really, really against novelties that somehow impact on our identity. Now we have a problem of defining our identity is a very much psychological issue. Now, who are we? And of course, if the landscape around us changes or some major yes changes happen, then in a sense it will weaken our identity, and so we prefer to skip, to avoid, no? And to yeah, and we prefer not to change rather than admitting that the way we grew up is a bit problematic or so on. So yes, I mean, I think my personal opinion is that the cognitive dissonance is really so strong, and that is really a barrier to change, because then in a systemic perspective, of course, we have the interaction at the political level, at the voters level, no? Since it is easier that to catch votes if you leverage on cognitive distance and resistance to change. And Roldan is saying that there are 4 minutes left. And so he's asking whether we are organizing a special session at the Oslo conference. I must confess that I missed the deadline. I, I forgot completely, and so I mean, as far as I know, I don't know. I mean, I think we are not organizing, but I can ask confirm to Tiziano and Neves. We are not organizing. Yeah, unfortunately not. And so Neves, you are the boss, and so perhaps you can say some closing words. 3 minutes, 2 minutes.
No, just to remind that this was a collective effort, and I have to thank, of course, the organizers and the co-editors for all this multi-year work, and of course the reviewers and the authors, and today the participants to this webinar. As we mentioned throughout all the webinar today, this is an ongoing process. And so we hope that this special issue will only open the debate, and so it's only a start, and only together we can do it. So the more we keep the debate open, and the more it will become more established. And yes, with this I think I said everything, and thank you for the opportunity to share these insights preliminary.
Yes. Okay. Okay.